The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Valley Ridge Academy, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Emma Brooks clutched her worn canvas backpack tighter as she navigated the crowded hallway, her thrift store jeans and simple cotton sweater making her feel like a ghost among the designer uniforms and expensive accessories that surrounded her. She had hoped to make it to her locker unnoticed, just like every other morning for the past 3 weeks since transferring to this elite preparatory school. But today her luck ran out. Well, look what the charity truck dropped off. Vanessa Carter's voice cut through the morning chatter like a blade. The 17-year-old stood blocking Emma's path, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light, her designer blazer immaculate. Behind her, 3 other students formed a semicircle, their expressions ranging from amused to cruel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma's stomach tightened, but she kept walking. "Excuse me," she said quietly, trying to step around them. "Oh, did I hurt your feelings?" Vanessa stepped sideways, maintaining the blockade. "I'm just curious how someone like you even got into Valley Ridge. Did your daddy fix someone's car for free? Or maybe your mom cleaned the right house?" A few students had stopped to watch, their phones discreetly recording. Emma felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she remembered her father's words from that morning. "Hold your head high, sweetheart. Your worth isn't measured by what others think." "I earned my place here," Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt. Vanessa laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Earned it? Please, look at those shoes. Look at that backpack. My mother spends more on lunch than your whole outfit cost." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every listening ear. "You don't belong here, farm girl. You never will." Something snapped inside Emma. All the weeks of whispered comments, deliberate shoulder bumps in the hallway, and lunch table rejections crystallized into a moment of clarity. She straightened her shoulders, and when she spoke, her voice carried the quiet strength her father had modeled for her entire life. "You're right about one thing, Vanessa. My clothes didn't cost much. But at least when I look in the mirror, I see someone who doesn't need to tear others down to feel important. Can you say the same?" The hallway fell silent. Vanessa's face flushed red, her composure cracking for the first time. "How dare you!" "Miss Brooks!" Principal Avery Collins appeared as if summoned by the tension itself, her heels clicking against the marble with military precision. At 45, she carried herself like a woman who had built her career on maintaining order and appearances above all else. Her steel gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her dark suit screamed authority. "Principal Collins," Emma said, relief flooding her voice. Finally, someone would see what was happening. But Collins' laser focus was entirely on Emma. "Are you causing a disruption in my hallway?" Emma blinked, confused. No, ma'am, Vanessa was—" "Miss Carter was what?" Collins' voice carried the weight of someone who had already made up her mind. Vanessa smoothly stepped forward, her mask of innocence perfectly in place. "I was just trying to welcome Emma, Principal Collins. I offered to help her find some resources for students who might need assistance with their wardrobe. But she became very aggressive and said some really hurtful things." Emma's mouth fell open. "That's not what happened. She was." "Miss Brooks." Collins raised her hand, silencing Emma with a gesture. "Miss Carter comes from a family that has contributed significantly to this institution. Her father sits on our board of trustees. Are you seriously suggesting she would lie?" Hayes, the implication hung in the air like smoke. Emma looked around desperately, seeing the faces of students who had witnessed everything, but they all suddenly found their phones or their shoes incredibly interesting. "I'm not lying," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. Collins studied her with cold eyes. "Your scholarship application mentioned disciplinary concerns at your previous school. It seems those patterns are continuing here." "I'm not on scholarship," Emma said, confusion mixing with growing panic. Collins ignored her, turning to address the growing crowd of students. "This is what happens when we lower our standards. When we allow disruption to masquerade as diversity." She turned back to Emma, her voice carrying to every corner of the hallway. "You are suspended, Miss Brooks. Effective immediately. Your father can collect you from the main office." The words hit Emma like physical blows, suspended, in front of everyone, for defending herself. "But I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. Collins was already walking away, Vanessa and her friends trailing behind like courtiers following a queen. "The office will call your father. I suggest you use this time to reflect on whether Valley Ridge Academy is truly the right fit for you." Emma stood alone in the hallway as students slowly dispersed, their whispered conversations and sideways glances following her like a heavy fog. Her hands shook as she made her way to the main office, her father's words echoing in her mind. "Sometimes, sweetheart, standing up for what's right means standing alone." She had stood up, and now she was more alone than ever. The wrench slipped from Mark Brooks' grease-stained hands as his phone buzzed against the workbench. He glanced at the caller, ID Valley Ridge Academy, and felt his gut tighten. Emma had been at that school for less than a month, and, in his experience, schools only called parents when something was wrong. "Mark Brooks," he answered, setting down the carburetor he'd been rebuilding. "Mr. Brooks, this is Principal Collins at Valley Ridge Academy. I'm calling to inform you that your daughter has been suspended and needs to be picked up immediately." The words hit him like a physical blow, but Mark's expression remained calm, a skill honed through 22 years in the Marines. Suspended for what? Disruptive behavior and verbal aggression toward another student. This kind of conduct is simply not acceptable at our institution. Mark was quiet for a moment, processing. Emma had never been in trouble at school, never. She was quiet, studious, kind to a fault. The idea of her being verbally aggressive toward anyone seemed as foreign as describing her as a linebacker. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said simply. "Mr. Brooks, I should mention that we'll need to discuss whether Valley Ridge is the appropriate environment for Emma moving forward." The line went dead before Mark could respond. He stared at his phone for a moment, then looked around his small garage. Auto parts lined metal shelves, and the familiar smell of motor oil and honest work filled the air. This was his world now, fixing things that were broken, solving problems with his hands and his knowledge. But as he washed the grease from his fingers, something shifted inside him. The steady, methodical mindset that had carried him through 2 tours in Afghanistan began to emerge. When his Marines had been in trouble, he hadn't panicked or reacted emotionally. He had gathered intelligence, assessed the situation, and acted with precision. The drive to Valley Ridge Academy took 28 minutes through the rolling hills of their small Virginia town. Mark's pickup truck looked out of place among the BMWs and Mercedes in the school parking lot, but he didn't care. He had learned long ago that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he drove, but by how he carried himself when it mattered. The main office was all marble and mahogany, designed to impress and intimidate. Mark approached the reception desk in his work clothes, clean but clearly marking him as someone who worked with his hands. "Mark Brooks, I'm here for my daughter." The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, lowered her voice. "She's been sitting in the conference room for an hour. The poor thing hasn't said a word." Mark found Emma slumped in a leather chair that dwarfed her small frame, staring at her hands. When she looked up and saw him, her composure finally cracked. Tears she had been holding back for hours spilled over. "Dad, I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered as he wrapped her in his arms. "I know, sweetheart. Tell me what happened." As they walked to his truck, Emma recounted the entire incident. Mark listened without interrupting, his trained mind cataloging every detail. The hallway confrontation. The witnesses who said nothing. The principal who had clearly made her decision before hearing Emma's side. "She said I was on scholarship," Emma said as they drove home. "But you pay full tuition, right?" "I mean, we're not rich, but—" "We're not on scholarship," Mark confirmed. "I pay every penny." "Then why did she assume?" Emma stopped, the implication dawning on her. Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Because she looked at us and made assumptions about who we are, what we're worth, whether we belong." They drove in silence for several minutes, the familiar landscape of their small town rolling past. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice small and defeated. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I don't belong there. Maybe I should just go back to public school." Mark pulled over at the side of the road and turned to face his daughter. Emma saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Not anger, but something colder and more dangerous. The look of a man who had decided that retreat was not an option. Emma, listen to me very carefully. When I was overseas, I served with men and women from every background you can imagine. Rich kids from Boston, farm boys from Iowa, kids from the projects in Detroit. And you know what I learned? Character isn't something you can buy at the mall or inherit from your parents. It's something you earn through your choices, especially when those choices are hard. He reached over and gently lifted her chin, making sure she was looking at him. That girl who humiliated you today, she showed everyone exactly who she is. And that principal who suspended you without even investigating, she showed everyone exactly who she is too. But you, Emma? You stood up for yourself with dignity. You spoke truth in the face of cruelty. That takes more courage than any uniform or rank could ever provide. But what do we do now? Emma asked. Mark was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had led troops into battle. Now we remind them what real strength looks like. The Brooks family kitchen had seen countless homework sessions, birthday celebrations, and late-night conversations, but it had never been used as a military briefing room before. Mark spread a yellow legal pad across the scratched wooden table, his movements deliberate and focused. Emma sat across from him, nursing a mug of hot chocolate, still processing the events of the day. Okay, sweetheart, I need you to walk me through everything again. But this time, I want every detail you can remember. What time did this happen? Who was there? What exactly was said? Emma straightened in her chair, recognizing something different in her father's demeanor. This wasn't just Dad asking about her day. This was something else entirely. It was around 8:15. I was heading to my locker before first period. She closed her eyes, concentrating. Vanessa was with Madison Cooper, Jessica Yang, and that new girl, Sarah something. They blocked my path near the trophy case. Mark wrote quickly, his hand writing the precise block letters the Marines had trained into him. Who else was around? Any teachers? Other students? Maybe 15 or 20 kids. Oliver Reyes was there. He sits behind me in AP History. And there were some seniors by the water fountain. I think one of them was recording on her phone. Good. What about after Collins showed up? How long was the conversation? Emma thought carefully. Maybe 3 minutes? She didn't ask me any questions about what happened. She just decided. Like she already knew what she was going to do before she even got there. Mark's pen stopped moving. What do you mean? I mean, she appeared really fast, Dad. Like she was already coming down that hallway before anyone called for help. The front door creaked open, and both Emma and Mark looked up to see Colonel Eugene Gene Price stepping into the kitchen without knocking, a privilege earned through 25 years of friendship. At 68, Gene still carried himself like the Marine he'd been, though his salt and pepper hair had gone completely gray, and his weathered face showed the lines of a man who had seen too much and worried about too many people. Heard you had some trouble today, kiddo, he said to Emma, setting a paper bag on the counter. Brought ice cream, mint chocolate chip. Emma managed a small smile. Uncle Gene, not really her uncle, but her father's closest friend, had an uncanny ability to appear whenever the Brooks family needed him most. He had been Mark's platoon sergeant in Afghanistan, and after they'd both returned home, he'd settled in the same town, becoming the grandfather figure Emma had never had. Thanks, Uncle Gene, she said, but Dad's conducting some kind of investigation. Gene glanced at the legal pad, recognizing the systematic approach immediately. Treating this like a mission brief. Something like that, Mark replied. Emma's telling me about a principal who suspended her without investigating what actually happened. Gene pulled out a chair and sat down, his expression growing serious. Tell me about this principal. As Emma recounted the story for the third time, Gene listened with the same focused attention he'd once given to intelligence reports. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Mark. You know what this is, don't you? Mark met his friend's eyes. Abuse of power. Classic intimidation tactics. Exactly. And you know what that means? Emma looked between the two men, feeling like she was witnessing a conversation in code. What does it mean? Gene turned to her, his voice gentle but firm. It means your dad is going to apply some of those leadership skills the Marines taught him, but instead of commanding troops, he's going to command respect for his daughter. I don't want to cause more trouble, Emma said quietly. Mark reached across the table and took her hand. Emma, let me tell you something I learned in the service. When someone in authority abuses their power, They're counting on good people to stay quiet. They're counting on victims to be too scared or too overwhelmed to fight back. That's how injustice survives. But what if I make it worse? What if they kick me out completely? Gene leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Kiddo, there's something your dad probably never told you about what made him such a good Marine. It wasn't that he was the strongest or the fastest or even the best shot. It was that when his people were in trouble, he never backed down. Not once. Emma looked at her father with new eyes. She knew he had served overseas, knew he had medals in a box somewhere in his closet, but he never talked about his military service. It was just part of who he had been before she was born. The thing is, Gene continued, those same qualities that made him a leader over there, they don't just disappear when you hang up the uniform. They're still there, waiting for the right battle. Mark was quiet for a long moment, then looked at his daughter. Emma, I want you to understand something. This isn't about revenge or getting even. This is about making sure that what happened to you doesn't happen to other kids who might not have anyone willing to fight for them. Mo. What are you going to do? Mark glanced at Gene, who nodded encouragingly. First, I'm going to request a meeting with Principal Collins. I'm going to give her a chance to explain her actions and correct the situation. And if she doesn't? Mark's expression hardened slightly, and for the first time, Emma caught a glimpse of the Marine who had led men into combat. Then I'm going to remind her that strength isn't about who you can push around. It's about who you choose to stand up for. Gene smiled and tapped the legal pad. And you're going to do it the right way, with discipline, preparation, and honor. Just like the Corps taught us, Mark agreed. Emma felt something she hadn't felt all day, hope. Her father wasn't just angry, he had a plan. And as she watched him continue taking notes, asking strategic questions about the school's hierarchy and policies, she began to understand that her quiet, hard-working mechanic father was much more than she had ever realized. Dad? She said quietly. Yeah, sweetheart? Thank you. Mark looked up from his notes and smiled at his daughter, and in that moment Emma saw both the gentle father who had raised her and the Marine who had never learned to abandon his people when they needed him most. Always, Emma. That's what Marines do. We leave no one behind. The next morning, Mark Brooks stood outside Valley Ridge Academy at precisely 8 a.m., his appearance carefully chosen. He wore his best khakis, a pressed white shirt, and a navy blazer, not to impress, but to show respect for the institution where his daughter was supposed to be learning. His military bearing was evident in every step as he walked through the marble hallways he had seen only briefly the day before. The main office buzzed with morning activity, but conversations seemed to pause as Mark approached the reception desk. Word traveled fast in small communities, and by now everyone knew about Emma Brooks' suspension. I'd like to speak with Principal Collins, Mark said to the receptionist, his voice polite but firm. Do you have an appointment, Mr. Brooks? No, ma'am, but I believe she'll want to discuss my daughter's situation. The receptionist, her nameplate read Mrs. Henderson, glanced toward the principal's office, then back at Mark. Something in his steady gaze made her pick up the phone. Principal Collins? Emma Brooks, father is here to see you. A pause. Yes, ma'am. She hung up and looked at Mark with what might have been sympathy. She'll see you now. Principal Collins' office was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, filled with education journals and policy manuals. Her massive mahogany desk sat positioned so that visitors had to look up at her, and the morning light streaming through the windows behind her created a halo effect that put her face in shadow. Mr. Brooks, she said without standing or offering her hand, I assume you're here about Emma's suspension. Yes, ma'am, I am. Mark remained standing until she gestured impatiently to a chair. I hope you'll use this time to discuss appropriate behavior with your daughter. The kind of outburst she displayed yesterday simply cannot be tolerated at Valley Ridge. Mark leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped calmly in front of him. Could you describe this outburst for me? Collins blinked, clearly expecting contrition rather than questions. Excuse me? I'd like to understand exactly what my daughter did that warranted suspension. She was verbally aggressive toward another student. She caused a public disturbance in our hallway during class time. And what provoked this behavior? Collins' lips tightened. Mr. Brooks, I'm not sure what you're implying, but Emma's actions speak for themselves. Do they? Mark's voice remained level, but something in his tone made Collins shift in her chair. Because from what Emma tells me, she was defending herself from harassment. Miss Carter was simply trying to be helpful. By blocking Emma's path and making comments about her family's financial situation, Collins straightened, her authority clearly challenged. Mr. Brooks, I think you're misunderstanding the dynamic here. Valley Ridge Academy has certain standards, certain expectations. When students don't meet those expectations, it creates tension. Mark was quiet for a moment, absorbing the implication. When he spoke again, his voice carried a dangerous calm that would have been familiar to any Marine who had served under him. Are you suggesting that my daughter doesn't meet your standards? I'm suggesting that perhaps Valley Ridge isn't the right fit for your family. The words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Mark studied Collins' face, noting the slight lift of her chin, the way her fingers drummed against her desk. In Afghanistan, he had learned to read people quickly, to identify who was bluffing, who was genuinely dangerous, and who was simply drunk on their own power. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Principal Collins, he said quietly, how long have you been in education? The question caught her off guard. 15 years. Why? And in those 15 years, how many students have you suspended without conducting a proper investigation? I don't appreciate your tone, Mr. Brooks. That wasn't my tone, ma'am. That was just a question. Mark leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. See, where I come from, the military, we have this concept called due process. Before you discipline someone, you gather facts. You interview witnesses. You consider all sides of a situation. Collins' face was reddening. This isn't the military, Mr. Brooks. No, ma'am, it's not. It's an educational institution, which means the standards should be even higher, not lower. I think this meeting is over. Mark stood slowly, his movement controlled and deliberate. You're probably right, but I want to make sure I understand your position clearly. You're telling me that my daughter, who has never been in trouble before, who has excellent grades, who pays full tuition, doesn't belong here because she defended herself from bullying? I'm telling you that disruption will not be tolerated, regardless of the circumstances. Regardless of the circumstances, Mark repeated, as if testing the words. That's an interesting policy. Collins stood as well, moving around her desk to assert her authority. Mr. Brooks, I've been patient with you, but Valley Ridge Academy has operated successfully for over 50 years. We don't need advice from people who don't understand our culture. Mark turned toward the door, then paused. When he looked back at Collins, his expression was unreadable. Principal Collins, in the Marines, we had a saying, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. You walked past bullying yesterday and accepted it. You walked past injustice and accepted it. That tells me everything I need to know about your standards. He opened the door, then turned back one final time. My daughter's suspension will be overturned, and she'll be back in class tomorrow. Not because I'm asking you, because it's the right thing to do. You have until this afternoon to make that call. And if I don't? Collins' voice was shrill now, her composure completely shattered. Mark smiled, not with warmth, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced much worse opponents than a small-town principal. Then you'll discover what happens when someone who actually understands standards decides to enforce them. He left Collins standing in her office, staring after him, probably wondering if she had just been threatened or simply outmaneuvered. As Mark walked through the hallways of Valley Ridge Academy, past the trophy cases and motivational posters, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The clear sense of mission that had once driven him through the most difficult moments of his military service. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. By Thursday afternoon, Mark's small garage had become an unofficial headquarters for what Jean jokingly called Operation Fair Play. The yellow legal pad had been joined by a manila folder stuffed with phone numbers, a notebook filled with testimonials, and a growing stack of evidence that Valley Ridge Academy had a serious problem with selective enforcement. Mark was under the hood of a 2015 Honda Civic when Oliver Reyes appeared in his doorway, looking nervous but determined. The 17-year-old clutched a laptop bag and kept glancing over his shoulder as if he expected Principal Collins to materialize behind him. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Oliver. I sit behind Emma in history class." Mark emerged from under the hood, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He had heard about Oliver from Emma, the quiet, brilliant kid who was one of the few actual scholarship students at Valley Ridge. "Oliver, Emma's mentioned you. What can I do for you?" Oliver shifted his weight, clearly working up courage. "I recorded what happened Tuesday morning, on my phone, and I think you should see it." Mark set down his tools and gave Oliver his full attention. "Show me." The video was shaky but clear enough. Oliver had started recording when he heard voices getting louder, capturing the entire confrontation from Vanessa's initial blocking of Emma's path to Principal Collins' arrival. Mark watched his daughter defend herself with quiet dignity while Vanessa escalated the situation, then watched Collins make her decision without investigating. "This is excellent evidence," Mark said quietly. "Why didn't you show this to Collins when it happened?" Oliver looked down at his shoes. "Because I'm on scholarship, Mr. Brooks. My mom cleans houses to help pay what the scholarship doesn't cover. If I made trouble for Vanessa Carter..." Mark understood immediately. Oliver was in the same position Emma had been in, vulnerable to retaliation from the very people who were supposed to protect him. "Oliver, would you be willing to share this with the school board?" "That depends. What are you planning to do?" Before Mark could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number he didn't recognize. Mark Brooks. "Mr. Brooks, this is Jennifer Martinez. My daughter Sophia is a junior at Valley Ridge." The woman's voice was hesitant but determined. "I heard about what happened to Emma, and I think we need to talk." An hour later, Mark's garage had become an impromptu community meeting. Jennifer Martinez sat on a folding chair next to Oliver, while Tom Patterson, a carpenter whose son was a sophomore, leaned against the workbench. Even Mrs. Chin, whose daughter Lucy was in Emma's art class, had closed her restaurant early to attend. "It's been going on for years," Jennifer was saying, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Sophia came home in tears last month because Madison Cooper told her that certain people should be grateful for the opportunity to attend Valley Ridge." Tom nodded grimly. "My boy Jake got detention for being 2 minutes late to class. Same day he watched Vanessa Carter waltz in 15 minutes late to the same class with Starbucks and got a smile from the teacher. Lucy stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria," Mrs. Chin added quietly. "The other girls make comments about her bringing weird food from home. When she told her teacher she was told to try to fit in better." Mark listened to each story, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. The pattern was clear. Valley Ridge Academy had created a two-tier system where wealthy students operated under different rules than everyone else. "The question is," Mark said finally, "what do we do about it?" Oliver looked up from his laptop. "I've been thinking about that. I'm not the only one who recorded stuff. Kids record everything these days. If we could get other students to share their videos, their stories..." "That's dangerous for them," Jennifer pointed out. "These kids are scared of retaliation." "But what if they weren't alone?" Mark asked. "What if this became bigger than just one incident?" Tom straightened up. "You talking about taking this public?" "I'm talking about taking this to the school board, officially, with documentation and evidence and witnesses who are willing to stand up." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "The school board. Half of them are parents of the kids who are causing the problems." "Maybe," Mark said, "but there's a process. Due process. And if they refuse to follow it, then we explore other options." Oliver was typing rapidly on his laptop. "I'm in the Student Tech Club. I could create a secure way for students to submit evidence anonymously. Videos, screenshots of text messages, written accounts." "That's smart," Mark said. "But we need more than student voices. We need teachers, other parents, people with standing in the community." "You think anyone will step forward?" Jennifer asked. Mark was quiet for a moment, remembering similar conversations in Afghanistan about local allies who were afraid to stand up to corruption. "Here's what I learned in the Marines," he said finally. "Fear spreads, but so does courage. Right now, everyone feels alone, like they're the only ones who see the problem. But once people realize they're not alone, once they see that others are willing to stand up, it creates momentum," Tom finished. "Exactly, and momentum is hard to stop." Oliver looked up from his laptop. Mr. Brooks, can I ask you something? What's your endgame here? I mean, best case scenario, what are you hoping to achieve? Mark considered the question carefully. Honestly, I want my daughter to be able to go to school without being harassed. But more than that, I want every kid at Valley Ridge to have the same opportunity to learn and grow without being made to feel like they don't belong. And if the school board won't listen? Mark smiled, and for a moment Oliver caught a glimpse of the Marine who had never learned to retreat. Then we make sure everyone else does. As the group began to disperse, making plans to reach out to other families and gather more evidence, Oliver lingered behind. Mr. Brooks? Emma's lucky to have you as a dad. Mark clapped the young man on the shoulder, and Valley Ridge is lucky to have students like you and Emma. They just don't know it yet. After everyone left, Mark sat alone in his garage, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the growing evidence of institutional bias at his daughter's school. He thought about Emma doing homework in her room, still believing that maybe she really didn't belong at Valley Ridge. Tomorrow, he would start making phone calls. Tomorrow, he would begin the process that would either reform the school or expose its failures to the entire community. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Marines had taught him that most battles were won before the first shot was fired, in the preparation and planning phases when you built your coalition and gathered your intelligence. Valley Ridge Academy was about to learn what a properly planned campaign looked like. Friday evening, the Brooks family dining room had been transformed. Emma's homework had been moved to make room for manila folders, organized by category: student testimonials, documentation of bias, school policy violations, and board member profiles. A laptop sat open next to a legal pad covered in Mark's precise handwriting, while Oliver's secure submission system had already collected 17 anonymous accounts from current and former Valley Ridge students. Emma sat at one end of the table, helping to organize printed emails and transcribe handwritten testimonials into a master document. She had been quiet for most of the evening, absorbing the scope of what her father was building. "Dad," she said finally, looking up from a particularly detailed account of favoritism in the Honor Society selection process, "did you know it was this bad when you started?" Mark paused in his review of the school's disciplinary policy manual, a document Oliver had somehow obtained through perfectly legal means involving the Freedom of Information Act and the school's status as a recipient of federal funding. "Honestly, no. I knew there was a problem, but I thought it was just a few bad actors. What we're seeing here is systemic." Jean entered the dining room carrying a pot of coffee and wearing the expression of a man who had spent the afternoon conducting reconnaissance. He had volunteered to visit some of the local businesses that employed Valley Ridge parents, ostensibly to discuss a potential car repair, but actually to gauge community sentiment. "What's the word from the outside world?" Mark asked. Jean poured coffee into 3 mugs, adding extra sugar to Emma's. "Interesting conversations. Turns out a lot of people have opinions about Valley Ridge, but they've been keeping them quiet." "Such as?" "Well, the owner of Patterson's Hardware, Tom's brother actually, mentioned that Valley Ridge families tend to look down on local businesses. Won't use them for catering or supplies because they're not prestigious enough. Meanwhile, they drive 30 minutes to the city for everything." Emma frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Local businesses are part of the community." "Not if you don't consider yourself part of the local community," Mark pointed out. "If you see Valley Ridge Academy as a stepping stone to something bigger and better." Jean sat down and opened his own folder. "I also talked to Beth Rodriguez at the diner. Her nephew graduated from Valley Ridge 3 years ago. Brilliant kid. Went to MIT on a full scholarship. Want to guess how the school celebrated that achievement?" "They didn't," Emma said flatly. "Bingo. But when the mayor's daughter got into Duke, with much lower test scores and grades, there was a front-page article in the school newsletter and a special assembly." Mark added another note to his legal pad. "Pattern of institutional bias in recognition and support." The front door opened, and Oliver entered carrying a pizza box and looking excited. "Mr. Brooks, you're not going to believe what happened today." "Good news, I hope." "Mrs. Foster pulled me aside after AP Government. She wants to talk to you." Emma looked up sharply. "Mrs. Foster? She never gets involved in anything." "That's what made it so surprising," Oliver said, setting down the pizza. "She said she's been teaching at Valley Ridge for 12 years, and she's tired of watching good students get crushed by the system." Jean raised an eyebrow. "A teacher willing to speak up, that's significant." It gets better, Oliver continued. She mentioned that 3 other teachers have been talking about the same issues. They're scared of retaliation, but they're also tired of being complicit. Mark leaned back in his chair, processing this development. In military terms, this was a potential breakthrough. Inside allies who understood the system and had witnessed the problems firsthand. Did she say what specifically she's willing to share? Gradebook patterns showing different standards for different students. Documentation of parent complaints that were ignored. And get this, apparently there's an informal policy that scholarship students and townies aren't recommended for leadership positions or honors. Emma set down her pen. That explains why Oliver never got nominated for student council, even though his GPA is higher than half the people who did. The question is, Mark said, are they willing to go on record? Because allegations are one thing, but sworn testimony from faculty members is something else entirely. Oliver pulled out his phone. Mrs. Foster said she'd meet with you tomorrow afternoon, privately, and she thinks she can convince at least 2 of the other teachers to join her. Jean smiled grimly. Sounds like the tide is turning. Maybe, Mark said cautiously, but we need to be prepared for pushback. Collins isn't going to take this lying down, and neither are the board members with kids at the school. Emma looked up from the testimonial she was reading. Dad, what happens if we win? I mean, if the board sides with us and changes things? Then Valley Ridge becomes a better school for everyone. And if we lose? Mark was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. If the board refuses to act, then we take this to the next level. The state education department, the local media, the court of public opinion. That sounds scary. Jean leaned forward. Emma, let me tell you something about your dad. In Afghanistan, he had a choice between a safe mission and a dangerous one that would protect a village full of civilians. You know which one he chose? Emma shook her head. The dangerous one. Every time. Because that's what leaders do. They take the risks so other people don't have to. Mark felt uncomfortable with the praise. This isn't about heroics. It's about doing what's right. Sometimes they're the same thing, Oliver said quietly. As the evening wore on, they continued organizing evidence and planning strategy. Mark had requested an audience with the school board for the following Thursday, exactly 1 week after Emma's suspension. The board had agreed, probably expecting a simple parent complaint that could be easily dismissed. They were about to discover their mistake. Dad? Emma said as they were cleaning up. I want to help with your presentation. Sweetheart, you don't need to. Yes, I do. This started because of me, and it affects me more than anyone. I should have a voice in how it ends. Mark studied his daughter's face, seeing a determination that reminded him of her mother. What did you have in mind? I want to write a letter. To the board, to the other students, to anyone who'll listen. About what it's like to be judged before you even speak. About what it means to have a father who's willing to fight for what's right. Jean smiled. Sounds like she inherited more than your stubborn streak, Mark. Apparently so, Mark said, pride evident in his voice. As Emma headed upstairs to start writing, Mark and Jean remained in the dining room, surrounded by the evidence of institutional failure and the growing coalition of people willing to challenge it. You know what this reminds me of, Jean said, sipping his coffee. What's that? Building the case for that village defense project in Kandahar. Remember? We spent weeks gathering intelligence, talking to locals, building trust. Everyone said it was too risky, too complicated. Mark remembered. It had been one of their most successful missions, ultimately protecting over 500 civilians and establishing a model that was replicated throughout the region. Think it'll work here? Jean looked at the organized folders, the laptop full of testimonials, the legal pad covered with strategic notes. Mark, you've got faculty allies, student witnesses, community support, and documented evidence of systematic bias. Collins is about to face the most prepared opponent she's ever encountered. Mark nodded, feeling the familiar calm that came with thorough preparation. Then let's make sure we're ready for anything. In exactly 6 days, he would stand before the Valley Ridge Academy School Board and deliver a speech that would either reform an institution or expose its failures to the world. Either outcome was acceptable. Staying silent was not. The Valley Ridge Academy boardroom had never felt smaller. What was normally a space designed to intimidate parents with its mahogany paneling and formal portraits of past board chairs now buzzed with unexpected tension. Mark Brooks sat in the front row, a manila folder on his lap, flanked by Emma and Jean. Behind them, the room had filled beyond capacity. Parents who had never attended a board meeting before, students who had risked detention to be there, and community members who had heard whispers of what was coming. Idli Seta. Dr. Bennett, the board chair, called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. sharp. A lifetime educator in his 60s, Bennett had presided over these meetings for 8 years, without ever facing anything more controversial than budget discussions or calendar changes. Tonight, the weight of genuine consequence pressed against his shoulders. "We have several items on tonight's agenda," he began, "but first we'll hear from Mr. Mark Brooks regarding his daughter's recent disciplinary action." Principal Collins sat at the administrative table, her expression carefully neutral, but Mark noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she shuffled papers. She had spent the week trying to rally support among board members, particularly those with children at the school. What she hadn't anticipated was the quiet conversations happening in grocery stores, coffee shops, and church lobbies throughout the community. Mark stood and walked to the podium with the same steady pace he had once used approaching commanding officers to deliver critical intelligence. He placed his folder on the lectern, looked out at the crowd, then directly at the 5 board members. "Thank you for this opportunity to address the board. My name is Mark Brooks. I served 22 years in the United States Marine Corps before returning home to raise my daughter and run a small business in this community." He paused, letting that information settle. In the back of the room, Oliver held his phone discreetly, recording everything. "Last Tuesday, my daughter Emma was suspended from Valley Ridge Academy. She was suspended for defending herself against harassment. She was suspended without an investigation. She was suspended by an administrator who made assumptions about our family based on our appearance and economic status." Collins shifted in her seat, but Mark's attention remained on the board. "Now, I could stand here tonight and simply ask you to overturn that suspension. I could appeal to your sense of fairness and hope that would be enough. But during the past week, I've discovered that Emma's experience wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern." Mark opened his folder and removed a single sheet of paper. "I've documented 17 separate incidents of discriminatory discipline over the past 2 years. Students from working families suspended for violations that wealthy students received warnings for. Scholarship recipients excluded from leadership opportunities despite superior qualifications. Faculty members pressured to apply different standards to different students." The room was dead silent now. Mark looked directly at board member Patricia Whitman, whose daughter Madison had been one of Vanessa's followers in the hallway incident. "Mrs. Whitman, your daughter witnessed the harassment of my daughter. She said nothing then, and she's said nothing since. What does that teach her about courage? About integrity?" Whitman's face reddened, but Mark had already moved on to board member Robert Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen from the restaurant. "Mr. Chen, you've served on this board for 6 years. In that time, how many students from working families have been recognized for academic excellence compared to students from wealthy families? I have the numbers if you'd like to see them." Dr. Bennett leaned forward. "Mr. Brooks, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support them?" "I do." Mark's voice remained calm, conversational. "But before I share that evidence, I want to tell you about something I learned in the Marines. We had a saying, 'The standard you walk past is the standard you accept.'" He stepped away from the podium, moving closer to the board table. "Every day at Valley Ridge Academy, faculty and administrators walk past harassment and call it social dynamics. They walk past discrimination and call it maintaining standards. They walk past injustice and call it protecting the school's reputation." Mark turned to face the crowd, including the students who had risked being there. "But here's what those students back there understand that some adults seem to have forgotten. Integrity isn't something you display when it's convenient. It's something you live when it's hard." Emma felt tears sting her eyes as she watched her father command the room with quiet authority. "My daughter stood up to a bully, and she was punished for it. But you know what she said to me yesterday? She said, 'Dad, even if they kick me out, at least I'll know I didn't stay silent.'" Mark returned to the podium, his voice growing stronger. "That's the lesson she learned from this experience. Not that she should accept mistreatment, but that standing up for what's right is worth the risk. And that's a lesson I'm proud to have taught her." He looked directly at Principal Collins. "Principal Collins, you suspended my daughter because you thought she was powerless, because you thought her family didn't matter, because you assumed we would accept injustice rather than fight it." Collins started to speak, but Mark continued. "You were wrong on all counts. Emma isn't powerless. She has a voice and the courage to use it. Her family does matter. We matter because we're part of this community. And we will never accept injustice, especially not injustice wrapped in the language of educational excellence." Mark closed his folder and stepped back from the podium. "I'm not asking you to fix this problem because of who I am or what I've done. I'm asking you to fix it because it's the right thing to do. Because every student in this school deserves the same respect, the same opportunities, and the same protection from harassment." He looked at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. "The Marines taught me that leadership isn't about commanding from a position of power. It's about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. It's about creating standards that apply to everyone, not just the people you're comfortable protecting." Mark walked back toward his seat, then turned for one final statement. "Valley Ridge Academy can be the excellent institution it claims to be, but only if you choose excellence in character, not just excellence in appearance. Only if you choose integrity over convenience. Only if you remember that the measure of a school isn't the wealth of its students, but the wisdom and courage it instills in all of them." He sat down next to Emma, who reached over and squeezed his hand. Behind them, the crowd remained silent, processing what they had just witnessed. Dr. Bennett cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. That was comprehensive. Principal Collins, would you like to respond?" Collins stood slowly, clearly unprepared for the methodical dismantling of her authority she had just witnessed. "Dr. Bennett, members of the board, Mr. Brooks has made some very serious accusations based on isolated incidents and misunderstandings. Valley Ridge Academy has operated with distinction for over 50 years. But as she spoke, her words sounded hollow after Mark's measured presentation. In the back of the room, Oliver continued recording, capturing not just the words, but the stark contrast between evasion and truth, between defensiveness and moral clarity. The battle for Valley Ridge Academy's soul had been joined, and everyone in that room knew they had just witnessed something that would not be contained within these walls. Mark Brooks woke up Friday morning to the sound of his phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. The first call was from his insurance agent, asking if he'd seen the video. The second was from a reporter at the local newspaper. By the time he had stumbled to the kitchen to make coffee, his phone had logged 14 missed calls and 47 text messages. Emma appeared in the doorway, her own phone in hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Dad, you're famous. What are you talking about?" Emma turned her phone toward him, showing a video with 127,000 views and climbing. The title read, "Marine Dad Destroys School Principal with Facts and Logic Must Watch." Mark squinted at the screen, recognizing Oliver's recording of the school board meeting. "How did this?" "Oliver posted it on TikTok and YouTube last night. Then someone shared it on Twitter, and then Facebook, and now—" Emma scrolled through her phone. "Dad, there are news articles. People are calling you a hero." Mark sat down heavily at the kitchen table, trying to process this development. He had spoken to a school board, not the internet. This wasn't supposed to happen. His phone rang again. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar area code. "Mr. Brooks, this is Amanda Chen from Channel 8 News in Richmond. We'd love to schedule an interview about your speech at the school board meeting. I appreciate the interest, but I'm not looking for publicity. Sir, with respect, the publicity has already found you. The question is whether you want to control the narrative or let others do it for you." After hanging up, Mark found Jean standing in his kitchen doorway, grinning like a man who had just witnessed his favorite underdog win the championship. "Congratulations, you're a viral sensation." That wasn't the plan. Best plans rarely survive contact with the enemy or the internet. Jean poured himself coffee from Mark's pot. "You know what this means, don't you? That I need to change my phone number? It means you've got their attention. All of them. The school board can't ignore this now, even if they wanted to." Mark's phone buzzed with a text from Oliver. "Mr. Brooks, you need to see what's happening at school." 20 minutes later, Mark and Jean sat in the Valley Ridge Academy parking lot watching something unprecedented unfold. Students were arriving for classes wearing simple, inexpensive clothes, jeans, t-shirts, sneakers. Not because they couldn't afford better, but as a deliberate statement of solidarity. Emma's become a symbol, Jean observed as they watched a group of seniors walk toward the building in what appeared to be carefully coordinated working-class outfits. Through the windshield, they could see Oliver approaching the truck, followed by a dozen other students. "Mr. Brooks," Oliver said as Mark rolled down his window, "you need to know what happened this morning." "Which is?" Principal Collins called an emergency assembly. She told everyone that outside agitators were trying to undermine the school's values. She said students who participated in disruptive demonstrations would face consequences. A junior named Ashley stepped forward. "So we all decided to dress like Emma. If she's going to suspend us, she'll have to suspend half the school." Mark felt a complex mix of pride and concern. "I appreciate the support, but I don't want any of you getting in trouble because of this." "Mr. Brooks," Oliver said, "we're not doing this just because of Emma. We're doing this because you showed us that adults can stand up for what's right. That someone in authority will actually listen if you speak truth clearly enough." Jean leaned across Mark to address the students. "You kids understand that this could get worse before it gets better, right?" Ashley nodded. "My mom saw the video. She said it was the first time she'd seen anyone at this school actually talk about fairness instead of just pretending it exists." Mark's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Dr. Bennett's number. "Mr. Brooks, we need to talk. Can you come to the school at 10 a.m.? "Of course. Is this about the board's decision?" "Among other things." "Mr. Brooks, you've created quite a situation here." "I've created a situation?" "Dr. Bennett, I spoke to a school board about my daughter's unfair suspension. I didn't create anything. I just refused to ignore what was already there." A long pause. "We'll see you at 10. As Mark hung up, Emma emerged from the crowd of students, wearing her usual simple clothes but carrying herself with new confidence. "Dad, Mrs. Foster wants to meet with you before you see Dr. Bennett. She said it's important." An hour later, Mark sat in Mrs. Foster's empty classroom as the veteran teacher shared something that would change everything. "Mark, I need to show you something, but first, you need to understand the risk I'm taking." She pulled out a folder. "These are emails between Principal Collins and certain board members from the past 6 months. They discuss strategies for managing the demographic challenge at Valley Ridge." Mark opened the folder and began reading. The correspondence was damning. Explicit discussions about discouraging enrollment from working families, strategies for limiting scholarship recipients, access to advanced programs, and methods for maintaining what one email called appropriate social standards. "How did you get these?" "Collins forwarded them to the wrong faculty email list last month. Most teachers deleted them, but I kept copies because I knew this day would come eventually." Mark looked up from the documents. "Mrs. Foster, this is evidence of deliberate discrimination." "I know. And after watching your speech last night..." "Yes, I saw the video. I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore." Mark's phone buzzed with another call from a reporter, but he ignored it. The viral attention had been unexpected, but these documents were the real victory. Principal Collins hadn't just been incompetent or biased. She had been implementing a systematic plan to discriminate against students like Emma. "Mrs. Foster, would you be willing to share these with the school board?" After last night, after seeing what real courage looks like, she smiled. "Mr. Brooks, I've been teaching for 15 years. It's time I started modeling the integrity I try to teach my students." As Mark left the classroom, he realized that Oliver's video had done more than make him internet famous. It had given other people permission to be brave. And that was going to make all the difference. By the time he reached Dr. Bennett's office, Mark had a folder full of evidence that would either reform Valley Ridge Academy or destroy it. Either outcome was preferable to the status quo. The emergency school board meeting was called for 7 p.m. Friday evening, less than 24 hours after Mark's speech had gone viral. The boardroom, which had been packed the night before, was now standing room only. Parents who had never engaged with school politics sat next to reporters with cameras, while students filled every available space despite threats of disciplinary action. Principal Collins sat at the administrative table, flanked by what appeared to be 2 lawyers. Her usual composure had been replaced by the tight-lipped expression of someone under siege. Board members Patricia Whitman and Robert Chen whispered urgently to each other, while Dr. Bennett reviewed documents with grim concentration. Mark entered the room with Emma, Jean, and Mrs. Foster, carrying a folder that contained not just testimonials and statistics but the smoking gun emails that Mrs. Foster had provided. The crowd parted to let them through, and Mark noticed something remarkable. Parents and students who had never spoken to each other were sitting together, united by a common understanding that this moment would define Valley Ridge Academy's future. Dr. Bennett called the meeting to order, his voice strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to address the concerns raised at yesterday's meeting and to discuss recent developments that have come to the board's attention." He looked directly at Mark. "Mr. Brooks, your presentation yesterday has generated significant public interest. It has also raised questions about the administration and policies of this institution." "That wasn't my intention," Mark replied calmly. "My intention was to address my daughter's unfair suspension and to ensure it doesn't happen to other students." Nevertheless, Collins interjected, standing despite not being recognized by the chair. "This circus atmosphere is exactly what I warned about. Outside agitators using isolated incidents to undermine an institution that has served this community for over 50 years. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Collins had just referred to parents and students as outside agitators in their own school's boardroom. Dr. Bennett raised his hand for silence. "Principal Collins, please be seated. Mr. Brooks, do you have additional information you'd like to share with the board?" Mark stood and walked to the podium, but this time, Mrs. Foster stood as well. "Dr. Bennett, before Mr. Brooks speaks, I have something the board needs to see." Collins went rigid in her chair. "Dr. Bennett, I object to this irregular." "Mrs. Foster has been a faculty member here for 15 years, Bennett interrupted. "I think we can hear what she has to say." Mrs. Foster approached the podium with the confidence of someone who had finally decided to do what she should have done months earlier. "Members of the board, I have in my possession email correspondence between Principal Collins and certain board members that reveals a deliberate strategy to discriminate against students from working families." The room erupted. Collins shot to her feet. "This is outrageous!" Those emails were taken out of context. "Dr. Bennett," Mark said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "Mrs. Foster shared these documents with me this morning. I've reviewed them carefully. They contain explicit discussions about limiting opportunities for scholarship students and strategies for discouraging enrollment from what the emails term undesirable demographics." Bennett's face had gone pale. "Mrs. Foster, are you willing to provide these documents to the board for review?" "I am. And I'm prepared to testify under oath about the pressure faculty members have faced to apply different standards to different students." Collins was now flanked by her lawyers, whispering urgently. But Mark wasn't finished. "Dr. Bennett, these emails prove that Emma's suspension wasn't an isolated incident or a misunderstanding. It was part of a systematic effort to exclude students like her from full participation in the school community." Mark turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. "Yesterday I spoke about the standards we walk past versus the standards we accept. Tonight we have a choice. We can accept a school that operates with 2 sets of rules, or we can demand better." Patricia Whitman finally spoke up, her voice defensive. "Mr. Brooks, even if these allegations are true, you have to understand the pressures we face. Maintaining academic excellence requires difficult decisions." "Mrs. Whitman," Mark interrupted, "I spent 22 years in the Marines. I understand difficult decisions. But I also understand the difference between maintaining standards and maintaining prejudice." Jean stood up in the audience, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had earned the right to speak truth to power. "Mr. Brooks didn't serve overseas so his daughter could come home and face discrimination in her own school. None of us fought for that." Mark looked at Collins, who was now conferring intensely with her legal team. "Principal Collins, you have an opportunity here. You can accept responsibility for these policies and work to change them, or you can continue to deny and deflect while the evidence speaks for itself." Collins stood, her composure finally cracking completely. "Mr. Brooks, you've turned this into a media circus. You've encouraged students to disrupt our educational environment. You've used your military service to manipulate public opinion." "Principal Collins," Dr. Bennett said firmly, "that's enough. Mark remained calm, even as Collins attacked everything he stood for. Principal Collins is right about one thing. I did use my military training. I used the discipline to gather facts before making accusations. I used the strategic thinking to build a case based on evidence rather than emotion. And I used the leadership skills to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. He looked directly at the board members. The question tonight isn't whether I've been fair to Principal Collins. The question is whether this board will be fair to the students and families who depend on Valley Ridge Academy to provide equal education, not equal discrimination. Dr. Bennett looked around the packed room, then at the folder of damning emails, then at Collins, who was clearly preparing for a legal battle rather than an educational discussion. The board will recess for 30 minutes to review the documentation provided by Mrs. Foster. As the board filed out, the room buzzed with conversation. Students approached Mark to thank him. Parents who had never met began planning follow-up actions, and reporters updated their stories in real time. Emma stood next to her father, watching the community that had formed around their fight for fairness. "Dad, what do you think they'll decide?" Mark looked at his daughter, then at the crowd of people who had found their voices because he had shown them what courage looked like. "I think they'll do the right thing, and if they don't, we'll keep fighting until they do." When the board returned, Dr. Bennett's expression was grave. After reviewing the evidence presented tonight, the board has voted to place Principal Collins on administrative leave pending a full investigation into the policies and practices described in tonight's testimony. The room erupted in applause, but Mark felt no sense of victory. This was just the beginning of the real work, building a school culture based on fairness rather than favoritism. Collins gathered her papers and walked toward the exit, flanked by her lawyers. As she passed Mark, she paused. "This isn't over, Mr. Brooks." Mark met her gaze with the calm confidence of a man who had faced much more dangerous opponents. "You're right, Principal Collins, it's not over. It's just beginning." 3 weeks later, Emma Brooks walked through the hallways of Valley Ridge Academy with her head held high, no longer the quiet girl trying to blend into the background. The marble floors gleamed the same as always, but something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere of the school. Students who had never spoken to each other before now exchanged genuine greetings. Teachers moved through the corridors with renewed purpose, and even the motivational posters seemed less like empty slogans and more like actual commitments. Emma paused at her locker, adjusting the small photo taped inside, a picture of her father in his marine dress blues, standing next to her mother on their wedding day. She had never displayed it before, worried that it might seem like showing off. Now she understood that being proud of your family wasn't arrogance. It was honoring the values they had taught you. "Hey, Emma." She turned to see Vanessa Carter approaching, looking uncomfortable but determined. The girl who had once blocked her path in humiliation now stood with shoulders slightly hunched, her usual entourage nowhere to be seen. "Vanessa." Emma's voice was neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile. "I wanted to apologize," Vanessa said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "What I said to you that day, the way I treated you, it was wrong." Emma studied her former tormentor's face, looking for signs of insincerity but finding only genuine discomfort and what appeared to be shame. "Why are you apologizing now?" Vanessa fidgeted with her designer handbag. "Because after everything that happened, after your dad's speech, I realized how I must have looked. How I actually was." She took a shaky breath. "My dad made me watch the video, the whole thing, and then he asked me if I was proud of the person I was becoming." Emma waited, sensing there was more. "The truth is, I was jealous," Vanessa continued. "You never seemed to need anyone's approval. You just were yourself. And I hated that because I've never felt brave enough to just be myself." It was the most honest thing Emma had ever heard Vanessa say. "Thank you for apologizing," Emma said simply. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." Vanessa nodded, looking relieved. "Maybe we could, I don't know, start over sometime?" "Maybe," Emma agreed, not ready to commit to friendship, but open to the possibility of coexistence without hostility. As Vanessa walked away, Oliver appeared at Emma's elbow, grinning. "Character development," he said approvingly. "I like seeing redemption arcs in real life." Emma laughed. "Only you would describe this in story terms. Speaking of which, have you seen the latest numbers on your dad's video?" Emma had stopped checking after the view count hit 2 million. The attention had been overwhelming at first, reporters calling the house, strangers recognizing her father at the grocery store, and even a few movie producers who wanted to buy the rights to their story. Mark had politely declined all interview requests beyond a single local news appearance, where he had redirected every question back to the importance of educational equity. "I haven't looked lately," Emma admitted. 4.7 million views, and there are copycat videos from other parents in other school districts. Your dad started something. The thought both thrilled and slightly terrified Emma. Her father had never wanted to be famous. He had just wanted to protect his daughter and ensure fairness for other students. But in a world hungry for examples of principled leadership, his measured speech had become a model for how to challenge injustice with dignity and facts. The first period bell rang, and Emma and Oliver headed toward their AP history class. Mrs. Foster had been promoted to interim principal, while the board conducted a nationwide search for Collins' permanent replacement. The change was immediately apparent. Disciplinary policies had been rewritten to ensure consistency. The Honor Society selection process had been overhauled to focus purely on merit, and a new student advocacy program had been established to address complaints before they escalated. At lunch, Emma sat with a diverse group that would have been unthinkable under the old regime: Oliver, Ashley, 2 football players, a theater kid, and even Madison Cooper, who had quietly distanced herself from Vanessa's old crowd. The cafeteria no longer felt segregated by invisible social barriers. "My mom wants to invite your dad to speak at our church," Ashley mentioned between bites of her sandwich. "She says the community needs more examples of how to stand up for what's right without tearing other people down." Emma smiled. He'd probably say yes. He's been getting a lot of those requests. After school, Emma walked to her father's garage, a routine she had started since the whole ordeal began. She found him under the hood of a pickup truck, his work clothes smudged with honest grease, looking perfectly content to be exactly where he was. "How was school today?" he asked without looking up from the engine. "Good," Vanessa apologized. That got his attention. Mark emerged from under the hood, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Really? How do you feel about that? Like, maybe people can change if they want to badly enough." Mark nodded approvingly. "That's very mature of you." Jean ambled in from the back office, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and wearing the satisfied expression of a man whose faith in his friend had been completely vindicated. "Any more reporters call today?" Jean asked, handing Mark one of the cups. 3, including someone from CNN who wanted to do a documentary about viral activism. I told them I wasn't an activist. I was just a father who refused to let his daughter be treated unfairly. Emma settled into an old office chair they had moved into the main garage area for her after-school visits. "Dad, do you ever regret it? Speaking out, I mean?" Mark considered the question seriously, the way he approached everything important. "Do I regret the attention? The disruption to our quiet life? Sometimes." He looked at his daughter, his expression softening. "But do I regret standing up for you? Never. Not for a second." "The Marine Corps taught your dad a lot of things," Jean added. "But the most important was that you never abandon your people when they need you." Emma felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. "I'm proud to be your daughter." Mark set down his coffee and pulled Emma into a hug that smelled like motor oil and determination. "And I'm proud that when someone tried to make you feel small, you refused to shrink." As the afternoon light slanted through the garage windows, father and daughter stood surrounded by the tools of honest work and the satisfaction of a job well done. Outside, the world continued to debate the video that had made Mark Brooks' internet famous, but inside this small garage, a man who had served his country with honor was content to serve his family and community with the same quiet integrity. The fight for Emma's dignity had become something larger, a reminder that true strength wasn't about dominating others, but about lifting them up. That leadership wasn't about commanding from authority, but about standing up for principles when it mattered most. And in a small Virginia town, in the hallways of Valley Ridge Academy, and in viral videos shared across the globe, that lesson continued to spread, one person at a time, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply the courage to speak truth with dignity and never back down from what's right. Mark Brooks had returned from duty long ago, but his real mission, raising a daughter who understood the difference between strength and cruelty, between standards and prejudice, was just beginning. And he wouldn't have it any other way. The end. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.